Whoa. Sorry about the hair. It's a little wild. I'm going pink today. All right, let's get into it. All right, guys. We've got one person. Hold on. All right, let's get into it. So today, my name is Ben Dearman. Introductions. Ben Dearman, KDR Fitness, The Wiz. So today, we're going to be talking about maintenance mindset and specifically the idea of A plan, B plan. Okay. So what we're going to go over, dieting mindset, which is extreme restriction. We're going to go over maintenance mindset, which is still restriction, just not extreme. We're going to talk about A plan, B plan. We're going to talk about the 80% rule. And we're going to talk about what is maintenance, right? Because a lot of people ask, like, well, what is maintenance? How do I know that I'm in maintenance, right? Excuse me. So, quick story. But first, a couple facts. So, a year from now, 90% of people will be fatter and in worse shape. That's the statistics. All right. You weigh, so I'm about 185 right now. If I just keep doing everything the way that I'm doing, and I just maybe drop my activity down a little bit, a year from now, I will be heavier and fatter and worse shape. Okay. We lose muscle and gain fat every year over the age of 30, roughly. Kaizen or Kaizen, so important. I have it tattooed on my arm. Right. So this is a Japanese idea of constant improvement in everything you do. And this is a very important concept for me personally, but it was also an important concept for the gym. And it still is an important concept for the gym. So in my early 30s, I was like, yo, you need to be getting stronger and leaner. Otherwise, you are just wasting your time. There are two main things that made me change my mind because that's not a realistic, belief for you to have for the rest of your life. Because that means that if I'm not getting leaner and stronger and reducing my body fat percentage every single year for like the next 50 years, then I'm spinning my wheels. I'm just wasting my time. And that was a ridiculous belief that I had. Okay. So there are two main things that made me change my mind: Coach Jamie and cancer. I'm not going to talk too much about how cancer impacted it. I'm going to stay more on kind of Coach Jamie. There was also another aspect that made me change my mind. And this is basically every single person that I talk to that comes to us to lose weight, they have lost weight in the past. And so they'll almost always tell me, hey, I've lost weight in the past. I've lost 20 pounds, 50 pounds, 70 pounds, whatever the case may be. So if losing muscle and gaining fat is the reality for 90% of the population, then maintaining muscle and current fat levels means that you're actually improving. If a year from now, you're going to be heavier with less muscle and more body fat, then that means that if you just stay the same from now for another year to another year to another year, while everybody else is going down, you're staying the same. You actually are improving relative to everybody else, right? So when Jamie was pregnant with her son, she gained about 80 pounds. Okay, now that's pretty wild. I think when Logan was born, he was like 12. Okay. Normally for pregnancies, they say that you should gain around 30 pounds ish. That really depends on the individual, but not 80 pounds. That's a whole nother, like, like 12-year-old, basically. The awesome thing though is that she's kept it off for 19 years. Logan's 20. So she's kept 80 pounds off for 19 years. She's abnormal, an anomaly. She's also maintained her body fat percent for 19 years. Again, even more of an abnormally. She's a freak. What a freak, right? What a freak. My wife is a freak. We should all try and be like Jamie because change is hard. You know, gaining muscle, losing body fat is hard. But staying the same is a lot easier. You just have to do enough to maintain your muscle and your fat level, right? So, kind of going back to this idea, I would tell Jamie all the time, hey, you need to be reducing your body fat percentage. You need to be building muscle. And she would always ask me, like, why? Like, I'm really happy with how I look and I'm really happy with how I feel right now. So why should I always be trying to change? And I would fight her and I would fight her and I would fight her for years. And then finally it clicked. And I was like, you know what? Man, if everybody's going down and you stay the same, you're actually winning compared to everybody else. And that was a big turning point for us in our system where we started to change things so that it would be more towards being successful in maintenance versus being successful in getting the weight off of you. And those are different things. So we see two main mental states when it comes to weight loss. We see that I want to lose the weight and I don't care about maintenance. And we see I want to lose the weight and I want to keep it off for life. Those are the two states that we see. That first mindset, I'll figure out how to maintain my weight once I get it off. These people generally fail. And that's also the vast majority of the population when it comes to weight loss. I'll figure it out. I'll figure it out once I get the weight off. That's like saying, hey, I just have to get to Mexico for my vacation. I'll figure out a return flight home, you know, on like the last day of my vacation in Mexico. No, you won't. And if you do, it's probably going to cost a lot of money. It's going to be really miserable for you, right? You're much better off having that return trip already booked. Makes sense, right? So the people that are like, hey, I'll book the return trip after I get there the last day, these people tend to want results at unreasonable rates because they have achieved those results in the past. One of the problems with weight loss is it's really easy to lose a lot of weight really fast. You know, you don't eat for the next week, you could lose 20 pounds. That sets some very unrealistic expectations, right? So part of the problem with losing weight is it's really easy to lose the weight. It's really hard to keep the weight off. Okay. And when I say it's really easy to lose the weight, I mean in a very short period of time. Anybody can, you know, dial down on their diet nutrition and not and eat 500 calories for a week and they'll lose a shitload of weight, but they're not going to be able to maintain that for life to be able to keep the weight off. Right. So a lot of problems are really based around the fact that people have done unreasonable things in the past and they expect for those things to be able to give them different results, even though that those things gave them the same results. Hey, I did this crash diet. I lost 50 pounds in 6 months, but then I put the weight back on over the next year. And then I did that 5 times over the last 10 years because every time I expected to get a different result. It's not going to happen, right? The second mindset, I want to lose the weight. I want to keep it off for life. Those are our winners. Those are the people that are going to be successful in maintenance. These people understand slow, steady changes create the best results, right? So for long-term successful weight loss and maintenance, you need 2 phases. Just like you would go on a vacation, except you'd really have like 3 phases in your vacation. You'd have the trip down, you would have the vacation at wherever you're at, and then you'd have the trip back, right? So for weight loss, there's 2 phases. There's your phase 1, your transformation, and your phase 2 is your maintenance. All right. You might go back and forth between those 2 several times, depending on how much weight you need to lose. Unfortunately, what it usually looks like is people do the phase 1, the transformation, and then the phase 2, it's the hope like hell you can keep the weight off and you ultimately fail. Right. That's usually how people go about it. So it's very important that you're thinking about maintenance in terms of 2 phases. This is your transformation phase. Once you get done with your transformation, then you go into your maintenance phase. 2 phases, all right? So the wrong way, the goal, I want to lose weight. Kelly wants to lose 30 pounds for her upcoming trip to Mexico. We are going to Mexico. That's why I'm talking a lot about Mexico. She doesn't like the gym, but decides to go 4 times a week. Great job, Kelly. Usually she eats 50% of her carbs. Usually she eats 50% of her calories from carbs. She decides to only eat vegetables during the day, which she hates. and then she gets some carbs in the evening. She also knows protein is super important for this transformation, so she starts to eat a little more protein than what she's used to. So Kelly loses the weight. She goes to Mexico. She comes back and she proceeds to stop going to the gym. She stops eating the veggies. She replaces them with more starchy processed carbohydrates. Her protein intake goes down. And since she reached her goal, why bother eating more protein? Right? She reached her goal. The weight comes back on over the next few months. That's the typical process. That's the typical cycle that we see. That is the wrong way to go about losing weight. You want to do the opposite. So what is maintenance? This is from a conversation somebody had asked me via text message, and this was the reply that I sent back to them because they were like, how do I know when I'm in maintenance? What define maintenance, right? So maintenance would be defined as hovering around a specific weight plus or minus 1 to 4% for at least 6 months, better for a year. So if I weigh 190 on average for 6 months with a low of 182 and a high of 198, and it just kind of goes like that for the 6 months, but it averages at that 190, that's maintenance for me. Maintenance will always include weight fluctuations roughly of 1 to 4%. Sometimes the wild degrees, sometimes you might gain 10, 15, 20 pounds over a weekend, depending on what your current body weight is. Remember, always look at the averages. That's a big reason why you should be tracking your weight multiple times per week once you get into maintenance. You probably don't have to weigh yourself every day when you get into maintenance, but you should be weighing yourself like 3 times a week on average, and then tracking that so that you can see what your average is. Maintenance is always the goal. So think of it like this. Picture you in your happy place. And the happy place was the time in your life where you were the happiest with how you looked and felt. Chances are it might be right now. Hopefully it's right now. Hopefully, cross my fingers. But it's probably not because you're watching this and you're interested in losing weight and being able to maintain your progress at the end of that. If you stayed there, you wouldn't even been watching this video. We wouldn't even be talking to each other. You would have no idea who I am because you stayed at that happy place, right? So change is inevitable, but we can influence it way more than we think. And this kind of comes into the fat loss mindset. Fat loss mindset is, I'm going to lose 50 pounds, then figure out how to keep it off. Whereas a maintenance mindset, I'm going to lose 10 pounds or 10 to 20% of your goal. Let's say you want to lose 75 pounds. Then you lose about 15 pounds. Then you spend 1 to 2 weeks in maintenance, focusing on keeping the weight off. After those weeks, then you tackle the next 10 pounds or roughly 10 to 20%. And you repeat that cycle. Taking those 2 weeks off, 1 to 2 weeks off, that's called a maintenance or a diet break. And that really allows you to be able to kind of experience what's it like to live in maintenance, right? So let's say you want to lose 50 pounds and you get 15 pounds off of you. And you're like, all right, pump the brakes for 2 weeks. My goal for the next 2 weeks is not to lose any more weight. And it's to stay right around that 15-pound loss that I experienced, right? So let's say you went from 200 down to 185. All right, your goal for the next 2 weeks is to stay as close to 185 as you possibly can. The goal is not to try and lose weight. And what's going to happen during that period of time? You're going to increase your food a little tiny bit. You're going to decrease your activity a little tiny bit. That's typically what happens, all right? That gives you a taste of what maintenance is going to look like. It allows you to be able to take a break, pump the brakes, and actually be able to experience what maintenance looks like versus constantly trying to lose the weight for an entire year. And then you get to the end of the year and you're like, oh my God, I have no idea how I'm going to maintain these results. Okay. So by taking that maintenance break, by taking that diet break, it allows you to be able to experience what maintenance is going to look like. There are other reasons why you want to do that, that mostly stem around metabolic adaptations, which we're really not going to get into right now. But from a psychological standpoint, it allows you to experience what maintenance is going to look like for you. Losing weight requires being in a calorie deficit most of the time, right? Like 80% of the time, you got to be in calorie deficit. This is achieved in our system with the 5 ingredients to success. Activity, which is basically steps, exercise, body weight, or some kind of a physical metric. So you're measuring your body weight, or you're measuring your body fat percentage, or you're using clothing, for instance, something along those lines, something that is irrefutable, that gives you a hard data point to go off of. Food, obviously, food is a huge part of this. Hydration, big part, and sleep. Those are the 5 things, right? In order to lose weight, you got to track those 5 things. Pay attention to those 5 things. Maintenance is exactly the same. So maintenance requires being in a calorie surplus sometimes and a deficit sometimes. Maintenance requires a 50% deficit and a 50% surplus so that you're at maintenance, right? This is achieved in our system with the 5 ingredients of success. Okay, so it's the same thing. That's why it's so important that when you're going through that phase 1, that transformation, you're paying attention to those 5 things, because those 5 things are what's going to ultimately set the table for maintenance. So by focusing on those 5 steps, you're learning how to maintain your progress on day 1 of phase 1. Whereas most people figure out how to maintain their progress on day like never of maintenance. All right. So on day 1 of phase 1 transformation, if you're already monitoring these things, you're already setting yourself up for success in maintenance. We have a lot of people say, I don't want to track those things. I don't want to have to track my steps all the time and my food all the time and my water all the time. First of all, you don't have to track it all the time. Okay. Because remember, maintenance is being in a calorie surplus sometimes and a deficit sometimes. So you don't have to track it all the time, but you do have to be aware of it. So if you don't want to track those things at all, maintenance is going to be a lot harder than it needs to be. Right. If you go from getting 10,000 steps in your transformation, and then you go down to getting like 6,000 or 7,000 steps, which a lot of times you won't even pay attention to. Like you could get 3,000 steps less per day and you might not even notice it. So if you go from 10,000 down to 7,000, you're probably going to gain weight. All right. And that's because you weren't aware that you were taking 10,000 steps and it dropped down to 7,000. So your weight's going to fluctuate wildly to your displeasure, and you will not be able to predict what it will do or how you will look or feel. And that sucks. It's terrible. You don't know how you're going to look or feel the next day, right? So if you don't know that when you walk less than 6,000 steps, your weight goes up. These are all examples. If you don't know that when you consume half your daily water intake, your weight goes down. If you don't know that 5 days after a weekend binge, your weight goes back down to where it was on Friday, then you're probably not going to be successful at maintaining your weight. So let's talk about A plan, B plan. So this is how we want you to eat, okay? You have your A plan, or you have your A plan, and you have your B plan. And we want those plans as close together as possible. So A plan is your maintenance plan. That means you're eating more food, alcohol, sweets, more carbs, et cetera, et cetera. Well, let's say you want to go to Mexico a couple weeks. Let's say you have an event coming up you want to look really good for, whatever the case may be, in which case you're going to transition over into your B plan. That's your weight loss plan. It'll be less food. It's going to be the same foods that you're already eating, but you're going to cut back on your alcohol. You're going to cut back on your sweets and your carbs a little tiny bit in order to lose that weight. And then you go back on your A plan, right? So the idea is make those plans as close together as possible, because if you don't, then it becomes very difficult for you to be able to transition between each plan. Maintenance, even for Jamie, remember your weight's always going to fluctuate, okay? She tends to hover around like 134-ish. Sometimes she might be 139. Sometimes she might get down to like 131, okay? When she sees the 139, she's, oh, you know what? I need to go back on my B plan because that's a little bit too high. And then she starts to drop back down, and she gets back down into the low 130s, and then she goes back on her A plan. That is how maintenance is going to work. Very few people maintain their weight exactly the same for their entire life. Okay, so it's important you understand maintenance involves weight fluctuations. So this is the plan we want you to be on. A plan, B plan are overlapping each other. This is the plan that most people are on, right? Instead of their A plan, B plan being like this, it's like A plan is way over here and B plan is way over here, and they don't even look the same. So A plan is your maintenance plan, but ultimately it typically turns into a weight gain plan. You're overeating everything, just not all the time, and then the weight slowly creeps up. And then you're like, man, I gotta rein this in. I gained 50 pounds. I gotta rein this in. I gotta get these 50 pounds off me. Then you decide that you want to go on your B plan, which is your weight loss plan. You starve yourself to lose the weight so that you can binge to put the weight back on. That is a very classic cycle that we see with our members and with people coming into the system. So be like this. not like this. A really good example of this is keto is thankfully dying down in terms of popularity. But for a while, man, whoo, keto, big diet that people were really espousing for weight loss. Same thing with intermittent fasting, and thankfully, I think that might be dying down too, which is a whole nother talk. But anyway, so I talked to somebody, and I'm like, "Were you successful in losing weight in the past?" And 99% of them were like, "Yep." I said, "Great. Like, what did you do?" And it typically revolved around some kind of carbohydrate restriction. So it was like, "Oh, I went low carb." 20 years ago, it was, "Oh, I did Atkins. I did keto." Okay. Well, the problem with that is that practically everybody likes carbohydrates. Okay. Like carbs are yummy. All right. So when I'm talking to that person, they're like, "Yeah, I went on a low carb diet." And I say, "Okay, well, did you put the weight back on?" And they're like, "Yep." And I go, "Well, why do you think you put the weight back on?" "Oh, because I started eating carbs again." Wait a minute. So you purposely went on a plan, eliminating the foods that you actually wanted to be eating, which was carbohydrates, thinking that you were going to be okay to put the carbohydrates back into your diet, even though you have no idea how much of those carbs you can eat to keep the weight off. That's kind of silly. If you really like carbohydrates, then you should not be going on a ketogenic diet. You should not be going on a low carb diet, right? You should have carbs in your diet and then basically figure out how much of those carbs you can eat in order to keep and get the results you want. That's how you should be going about it, right? And that goes back to that A plan, B plan. If hypothetically, let's say I eat a cup and a half of carbs every single meal and I have 3 meals a day, that means I have 4.5 cups of carbohydrates. If I want to lose weight, all I have to do is go from 4.5 cups of carbs down to 3.5 cups of carbs. Really simple. That's it. I just eat like literally a cup of carbs less per day. That's the difference in your A plan and B plan. If I normally have like a bunch of tequila and vodka, let's say I drink 6 drinks over the weekend, 3 drinks on Friday, 3 drinks on Saturday. Okay, so that's my A plan. My B plan is instead of drinking 3 drinks on Friday and 3 drinks on Saturday, maybe I just have 1 drink on Friday, 1 drink on Saturday. That's my B plan, right? So by keeping those plans as close together as possible, you are setting yourself up to have way more success in maintenance. All right. So what is the difference in the mindset, right? So first of all, a lot of times dieting mindset is how miserable can I make myself? Like what's the least amount of food I can eat? What's the most amount of exercise I can do? Just how miserable can I make myself? Whereas maintenance is what's the minimum I need to do to maintain my weight? Those are different things. Okay. Restriction is still a part of it. We live in what's called an obesogenic environment. This is a term that food scientists or nutritionists will use. An obesogenic environment basically just means that our environment is designed to drive obesity rates up. It's not necessarily done on purpose, and again, this could be a whole nother talk, but it just happens to be that way. Okay, I live a little bit out in the middle of nowhere, but I can go about 4 minutes to my right. I can hit a gas station with all sorts of food. I can go about 8 minutes to my left. I hit another gas station with a bunch of food, right? So that is an obesogenic environment where you're basically surrounded by food at all times, and that food isn't necessarily the best food for you. So any way you look at it, you have to restrict. You cannot indiscriminately just shove food into your mouth and expect to be happy with how you look in the mirror and how you feel, unless you're like 18 to like 28, maybe. Okay. So the difference between your dieting mindset and your maintenance mindset is how much. That's the only difference. Just how much. Um, Real quick note on type A or all or nothing personalities or mentalities. Type A or all or nothing, these people do really well in weight loss because weight loss is really, it's very black or white. Are you in a calorie deficit or not? If you're not, you're not going to see results. If you are, you're going to see results. Pretty simple, pretty cut and dry, black and white. That's all or nothing. Okay. The problem with that is that all or nothing, whereas all or nothing is black or white, maintenance is gray. Remember, sometimes you're going to be in a calorie surplus, sometimes you're going to be in a calorie deficit. If you're always in a calorie surplus, or if you're in more of a calorie surplus than a deficit, you're going to slowly gain weight. If you're in more of a deficit than you are in a surplus, you're going to slowly lose weight. So it's literally about 50% deficit, 50% surplus averaged over time. Okay. That is the gray area. So a lot of times, all or nothing type A people, fantastic weight loss results. They'll lose like 5 pounds every week for like 6 months. But then you transition them over to their phase two. And because they can't live in that gray area, they end up putting the weight back on because they're all or nothing. Right. All right. 80% rule. So 80% rule as it applies to activity or exercise. This is really simple to understand. Whatever it is that you do in order to achieve a specific goal or result that you're happy with, you probably have to keep doing all the things that you did to get there in order to stay there. That makes sense. But people totally they space out when it comes to applying the same principle to weight loss and maintenance. So whatever you do in phase one, you need to continue doing in phase two at about 80%. So if you're working out 6 days per week to lose the weight, then you must work out at least 4 times to keep the weight off every week for life. That is incredibly unrealistic. Nobody's going to go to the gym every single week for the rest of their life, right? Which is why in our system, we really want you to be thinking about owning your fitness. So it's not reasonable to go to the gym every single week for the rest of your life, but it is reasonable for you to be able to get your fitness done at home. And that is owning your fitness. That's why it's so important that you're working out at least 1 day a week at home, that you have the implements, you have the toys, you have the equipment in order to be able to do that. You have the program, you have the coaching, the education, etc. Because by you working out 1 day a week at home, you are owning your fitness. You are learning how to be able to get the fitness done at home so that you never have to go to a gym ever again. Nothing wrong with gyms. It's just very unrealistic to think you're going to go to a gym every single week for the rest of your life. That shit's not going to happen. All right. So if you don't want to own your fitness, you could just plan on being a member for life. We don't have a problem with that, right? Totally fine. But we do want you to own your fitness because maintenance requires you to continue doing most of the activity and exercise you have already been doing to get the weight off of you. So again, just kind of following up on this, let's say you hit 10,000 steps every day in order to lose the weight, in which case I'd want you to be about 8,000 steps on average for maintenance, right? Remember, average is really what we're looking at. You know, like maybe Monday you're at 2,000 steps and, you know, like Tuesday you're at 15,000 steps, right? We're going to average that out. Same thing with your weight. We want to average. We want to look at those averages. We don't want to look at numbers in isolation. So when we talk about 80% as it applies to diet, it's the same idea. It's a little more complicated just because there's, on one hand, there's a lot more numbers, and then on the other hand, there's a lot less numbers when we talk about diet and nutrition. Really just depends on how you're going to be doing it. But when we talk about exercise activity, there's going to be numbers involved no matter what, okay? So again, whatever you do in phase one, you need to continue doing in phase two at about 80%. To lose weight, you need to select one of the below strategies, right? So there's really only two. I mean, there is a third strategy, which is eat more and move more, but that is complicated to get weight off of people with that particular strategy. So in the grand scheme of things, there are only really two strategies in order to lose weight, okay? You're going to eat less, move the same, and you're going to eat the same and move more, okay? One of those two. Now, when we talk about maintenance, there's actually 4 strategies, and you're going to use most people are going to use all 4 strategies. It's very rare for somebody to only use one of the strategies for maintenance. So maintenance, you have eat more, move the same. Maintenance, eating more, moving the same, your weight's going to stay the same. If you eat the same and you move less, maintenance, your weight's going to stay the same. If you eat more and move more, your weight's probably going to stay the same. If you eat less and move less, your weight will probably stay the same. Notice how my facial expressions are changing as I'm going through those 4 strategies. And it's because the best is eat a little bit more and move the same. So if you're working out 4 days a week and you're hitting 10,000 steps and you're eating like 1,800 calories, for instance, in order to lose the weight, well, then you're going to stay 4 days a week and 10,000 steps. You're going to go from 1,800 calories to 2,100 calories. All right. That's the best way to go about maintenance because you're maintaining the exercise level that you've already built, but you're also eating more food, which who doesn't like to eat more food? because the extra 300 calories that you're going to get are going to be cupcakes. It's going to be alcohol. You're not going to go from 1,800 calories to 2,100 calories by eating more chicken. Fuck that shit. You're going to go from 1,800 calories to 2,100 calories with 2 chocolate frosted donuts every day. 150 calories each, actually about 180 calories each. So much better for maintenance by eating more and moving the same. Now, what about eating the same and moving less? That works too. That's fine. Not as well as eating more and moving the same. Now, when you get to the eat less and move less, that's where we typically see people have the worst success with maintenance. People can still be successful eating less and moving less, but a lot of times they end up binging and then they end up slowly putting the weight back on. So in the grand scheme of things, for maintenance, we want to stick around with these two: the eat more, move the same, and the eat the same, move less. We're going to skip this one. Duplicate. All right. Sum it up, Dearman. So weight loss requires a calorie deficit achieved through manipulating Sitco. Sitco is just as calories in, calories out. Okay, so you're going to lose weight by manipulating that calorie deficit through calories in, calories out. And you're going to do that through either going back to this first one, so eating less, moving the same, or eating the same, moving more. If you do not know how much you move, then you cannot move more or continue moving the same. That should make sense to you. If you do not know how much you're eating, then you can't eat less, and you also can't eat the same. That's why it's important for you to be tracking those things, monitoring those things. So maintenance requires alternating between a surplus and a deficit. 50% of the time surplus, 50% of the time deficit. That might be let's say we take the month of August. You might be the first 2 weeks in a surplus and the next 2 weeks in a deficit. That means that, let's just say, well, I'll use me for example. That means that on August 1st, I'm going to be 185. On August 14th, I'm going to be like 192. But then at the end of August, come September 1st, I'm going to be right back down to that 185. Okay. That's one way you could look at it. Another way you could look at it is, let's say between October 1st and January 1st, which is, let's call it 3 months, October, November. Yep. So 3 months, 12 weeks, you're in a surplus. You know, we have lots of events. We have a lot of higher stress, holidays, et cetera, et cetera. Well, then over the next 9 months, you're in a deficit, right? You probably don't have to be in a deficit for 9 months. If you're in a surplus for 3 months, you probably only need to be in a deficit for 3 months in order to wash that out, in which case you go right back to your maintenance level. Okay. So maintenance requires alternating between surplus and deficit. That does mean that your weight will fluctuate, sometimes a lot. I just talked to somebody yesterday. She gained 11 pounds in 24 hours. All right. You need to be comfortable with weight fluctuations. You need to understand that weight fluctuations are normal. They're natural. There's nothing wrong with them. Be comfortable with those weight fluctuations. If you continue doing 80% of what you did to get your results, you will keep your results for life. So make sure that whatever you choose to do to lose the weight, you can see yourself doing it for the rest of your life to keep the weight off in some capacity. All right, guys, that's my maintenance talk. We're going to do some more talks about maintenance because there's a lot to it. There's a lot to it. But the big thing that I really want you guys to take home, other than just kind of this last slide, is by following the plan that we put you guys on, you are creating all of the steps that you need in order to maintain your progress over here. By not doing the plan that we put you on, it doesn't mean that you won't be successful in maintenance, but it does mean that you need to somehow quantify your decisions. So if you're like, I'm going to move more and eat less, okay, quantify that. How much more are you going to move? How much less are you going to eat? And if you answer that question with, I'm going to move more and eat less, and you don't quantify those decisions, you will most likely not be successful in keeping the weight off of you for life. You might keep it off for a year, maybe 2 or 3 years, which is fantastic. But the goal is you lose that weight and you never, ever, ever have to worry about going on some kind of a very restrictive diet again in order to get the weight off of you. because you have all of the tools and tips and tricks in order to keep the weight off of you because you're going to follow the plan that we give you. All right, gang. Thanks for tuning in.